Thanks for joining me. This lab session is entitled JMeter Test Results Reporting Lab. For this lab session, I would like to cover 3 reporting approaches that extend the simple reporting methods we have reviewed so far. The first will be a closer look at the JP at GC reporting. The second will be initiating the dashboard reporting from within the JMeter IDE. And the third approach will be how to initiate the dashboard reporting from the Windows command line or command prompt. The JP at GC reporting requests include a perfmon metrics collector, composite graphs, timeline graphs that either have to do with overtime or per second options, response time distribution charts, and response time percentiles. At this point, I will take a little time to demonstrate what you will find in the JMeter IDE and how to make use of the external command line or prompt reporting option. Here is the plan for the remaining time in this session. I'm going to select some JP at JC reports from the listener list and include in a test for review. Then I will step through the GUI dashboard option. Since I captured JTL data from the View Results Tree report option normally, I can use the command line option for reporting JP at JC or dashboard reporting. Okay, we have the JMeter IDE launched, and I have a script open that we've used before. In this particular script, we have 2 thread groups, one called Test Common Sites, and the second one called Test Common Sites 2. In the first one, we have Google sites that we're testing, and I can open that so you can see it. Google Search, YouTube, and Mail. And then in the second one, we have Amazon, Home Depot, and eBay. So these sites will be testing again, but I'm going to add some additional reports. Before, we were testing using these reports listed here. And these are some of the reports or listeners that come with JMeter when you install it. But now we're going to go to Test Plan, right-click on it, Add Listener. And if you look down toward the bottom, you'll see a number of them that start with JP at GC. I want to choose just 3 of those as an example for us to look at and see what it does for us in a test. So I'm going to select that first one, Active Threads Over Time. Notice that it placed that element down at the bottom of the script. I'm going to go back to Test Plan, Add Listener, and select another one over time, the bytes throughput over time, and select one more, Add Listener, scroll down to the bottom and select Response Times over time. So we want to see what these 3 additional listeners will do for us that are part of the JP at GC report plugin. All right, when we look on the right, I'm going to start back at the top of that list. At the active threads over time, I mentioned that each of these have 3 areas for processing or use in each of these report requests. You have chart, rows, select that, and settings. Now, of course, going to the back to the front, settings has a number of things, selections, options that can be set for the reporting. Rows will show you what was selected, and it will also show you legend colors, and you'll see that momentarily. And then chart will show you some kind of diagram that will give you a better feel for what happened, what data it collected, and how it was able to format it into some sort of graph. Okay, the bytes, same thing, and the response times, same thing. Now I want to go over to the settings and make sure we have, right now you see we're going to use the defaults. You see that the time value, a group time value, is set to 500 milliseconds. You'll see that it wants to use relative times, in other words, relative to the time the test starts, and what it calls a paint gradient. You'll see what that's about. And that's all that's selected there for defaults, except for here on the right. I want the line graph width to be at least 3. It's easier on the eyes. And same thing on the bytes. Go to the settings and change that to 3. This is the only option I'm going to change. Everything we're going to leave as defaults. You're welcome to look at those in more detail, try different settings, see if they meet what you need for testing. And this setting, change that to 3, and you'll see most of those settings are very similar. Okay, now I'm going to remind you, as far as the thread groups are concerned, for the test common sites, we're only using one user and we're going to loop 3 times. Whereas on the common sites, we're going to actually use 3 users and only loop 1 time. But the big difference there is the ramp up time is going to be 20 seconds, which will allow those 3 users plenty time to start and finish even before another user starts. So in effect, with the active threads report, you should never see more than 1 user at any given time. And you'll see what I mean in the report there. All right, let's go ahead and save this and start that test. I'm going to point to the View Results tree and click the Start button. And we're going to overwrite the existing file. The test has begun. You can see the View Tree Results output, and we're still running. The stop buttons are still highlighted. Now we're done. Okay, so we're ready to look at results. We're not going to look at the normal outputs just yet, with the exception of the View Results in table, and I'll show you why momentarily. Let's take a quick look at these new outputs. So we have the active threads over time. Click on the chart, and here we see a chart that's showing that no more than 1 user ran from the time we started to the time we ended So we ran for roughly 15 seconds, and the first thread group finished just between 3 and 4 seconds, while the second one, the first process, started just past a second and did not complete until 15 seconds later. So that's what we know from this so far. The most important thing is we know that there was no more than one user that ever ran at any given time during the 15-second test. If we go to the bytes, we can see, I'm going to click the chart button so we can see it. And by the way, if I click the rows, this is what I see. I see a legend of colors. So the red one is for bytes received per second, and the blue one is bytes sent per second. So there's an amount of data that was sent. As you can see here, it's at the 0 point throughout the test, while the amount of data received back was as much as 2,100,000 bytes per second that was received. So there's something we can find out more about that. We're saying that according to this chart, within the first 2 seconds, that amount of data came back to the client. So when those tests to go to a particular site, just to click on the home page of the site, there was a return of that many bytes, which is a large amount of data. We'll look at that a little bit more in more detail. We see that the amount of data after that started to go down. That should be an indication from an analysis standpoint that there must be some caching going on, because you would expect, if we were doing the same thing for 3 times at each site, then there would have been the same amount of data sent back. But instead, we see less and less data going back to the client. And as I said, that should be an indication of caching. Some kind of caching of data was going on. So less data needed to be sent back to the client. That's a good thing. Okay, and let's go to the last one. On the last one, look at the chart, and we see the response times over time. The top 2 line graphs have to do with transaction Google and transaction stress. Those are 2 that were composites of the details. So the transaction Google was the combination of Google Mail, search, and YouTube, and Home Depot, Amazon, and eBay are in transaction stores. So those are the 2 for that. That we're not that interested in. What we're more interested in are the detail timings, response times that we see. And since there were 3, there's actually 3 data points on each of those lines. And notice, first thing, that in most cases, there's a downward trend. That downward trend also is a good thing, because it also should indicate some caching was going on, and so therefore the time, the response time, decreased. There were exceptions though. You'll see that this green line, that is for YouTube, the time went up. So that suggests some change in what data came back or how much time it needed to respond to the request, the home page request, I should say. And we see a slight change here and a slight change here. Those should be, if I go to the rows, I can see that more clearly, that dark red and light red, if you will. Go back to the chart. The light red and the dark red are showing changes there. And that green, that one's easy to tell, the YouTube. Excuse me. So, without going into much more detail there, I just want you to see that we can tell some things analyzing these outputs. So these outputs are helpful to us. If I go back to that bytes again, as I said, we see this big jump here, all the way up to 2,100,000 bytes. And if we go back to the view results in table, it helps us to see what was going on in the first few seconds. So 3738 should be all of this data except for that 139 second there. But that shows us that there was a significant amount of data that came back to the client. What was sent was minimal data, but what came back was a large amount of data. And the most significant ones are the YouTube, which you would expect because it's video data, and Home Depot. And was there another? eBay. eBay was significant, just like YouTube was. So between the two of those, that was 800,000 bytes just for those two. And there were more than one that came through. So that gives us some idea of what was going on. There is a significant amount of data that comes across when you go to the home page for YouTube and for eBay. There's much information that's rendered on the screens when they display. I think that should be enough for you to begin to get an idea of what these can do for you in the GUI mode. Now we're going to take a look also at this outside of JMeter IDE in the command line approach in a few minutes. Moving on to dashboard GUI reporting. From the JMeter IDE, dashboard reporting can now be requested. JMeter's default behavior is to read and process samples from CSV files to generate HTML files containing graph views. It can generate the report at the end of a performance test in JMeter or on demand by selecting the individual reports from the tool's Generate HTML report option. The selection causes a pop-up window to display like the following. So here we are back in the JMeter IDE, and I now want to show you how to use the dashboard reporting from the IDE. So we go to the Tools pull-down menu, and we'll see an option called Generate HTML Report. I'm going to select that, and we get this little pop-up window. It may or may not have already been populated. In my case right now, it's empty. So the first thing we want to do is to identify a results file. Let me close this one more time, come back. In the View Results tree reporting or listener, I typically, not always, but typically have a JTL file. It can be a CSV file as well. But I have that, and it's defined in the bin, the JMeter bin directory or folder. And so that I keep recreating. You'll notice when we start the test, I always override what was there. So what we have at the end of a test, excuse me, is data that's useful for the dashboard reporting. So let's go back to Tools, Generate HTML Report, and I'm going to point to that file. And as I said, it can be a CSV or JTL file. I click on the Browse, and in the bin directory, you'll see that file is shown here. So I'm going to select that, click Open. Now that's been populated. We want the user.properties file. That's also in the bin directory. And there it is here. Select it, click Open. Now that's populated. And we want somewhere to put the reports. Some directory needs to be identified. I'm going to go to, that's not in the bin directory. I want to go slide up a little bit to JMeter, and I have a number of folders. I've got one called HTML Reports, and I'm going to select that one. Now, typically what you want is something that's clean, empty of all files. And I can do that before we select or start the test. So if I click Open, I'm not going to generate the report now. I'm going to go into that HTML Reports folder using Windows Explorer. Select one of these. Let's go to bin here and JMeter HTML Reports. And I'm going to just select everything here and clear it out. Okay, now it's an empty folder. And it doesn't have to be, but that's the cleanest way to do it, to make sure nothing gets left behind and you suddenly have something that's confusing you. All right, let's remove that out the way. Now we're back to the IDE, and there's the little pop-up window. I'm going to click Generate Report, and we're going to see a couple of messages come back to us as it's generating the report. First, to tell us that it's in progress. And now it tells us the report is created. I'm going to leave that open here, and on top of that, I'm going to go and look again at that folder. Okay, you see that data is now been repopulated in that folder, HTML Reports, and there is an index.html file. That's the key right there. That's the important one, to double click on it so that you can see the output that's associated with it. It comes up in the browser. I'm going to drag that over to this screen, highlight it, and so here we are. It's a nice formatted output. It shows what's called the AppDex or Application Performance Index. That's important. We've talked about that before. It shows the dashboard, which is where we are now. It shows some charts, overtime charts, throughput, response times, and custom graphs. also an overtime report. And so we can look at any of those. Let's just click on overtime. Sorry. Scroll down. Okay. Nope, we don't have that one. Let's look at charts, overtime, and here we are. And you'll see that there's some additional reports that can be selected from the overtime list. And here is what we see. Now, because our test is not as robust as it can be, and it will be, we don't see on some of the reports some information that we'd like to see, but it does produce the reports, and that's the most important part of this particular session here. We'll see more data later. Okay, let's go back to the dashboard, and I want to scroll down a little bit, show you the application performance index. We see the apdex values that were generated for each of the events that we tested. So for Google YouTube, we see 0.5, 500 milliseconds was the toleration threshold, and 1.5 seconds was the frustration threshold. So all that shows up in this report, and we see where that particular event landed. Some higher, some that are in the apdex, as far as the apdex is concerned, is 1, which is the best you can have. So Google search is good. Home Depot, Amazon, they're good. Okay, so just wanted to give you a little look and feel of the reporting that's called the dashboard reporting. And it's nice. It is helpful, has plenty good information. You can do quite a bit of analysis with all the reports that are available in this one dashboard report option. Now, we want to move on to look at another option. I'm turning your attention to what we can do outside of the JMeter IDE. Let's first see how we can generate JP at GC reports. It requires a command line that looks like this. The command line starts with a command, which is either a BAT or bash file for the Mac users, then 3 parameters, which are an image file to be generated, followed by an input JTL file, and then a JP at GC report file name designation. I have some additional information in the resource file for this session. If you install the Plugins Manager, this command should have installed too. If you do not see it in the JMeter folder, the bin folder, then I provided instructions in the resource file for this session. I've opened a command prompt and I've located the bin directory, did a change directory to get there, and now I have a command. I've highlighted it so you can see it more clearly, and it has the JMeter plugins command BAT file. The parameters are I'm going to generate a test.ping file, which will have the report in it. The input file I'm using is the perf test1.jtl, which I usually create from the view tree results in the GUI session. And then finally, the report I want from the plugin type is response times over time. I will show you a list of them, and that's also listed in your resource file. Okay, so now I can click or press the Enter key. Sorry about that. Hold on. Let's do that now. One more time. And we're done. Now, we don't see it doesn't automatically show you the output file, but that's that file we're looking for, test.ping, and we should find it in the bin directory. So let's go to the bin directory. I'm going to go here, JMeter and bin. Scroll down, I'm looking for a file that starts with test in the T's, and there it is, test ping. I double click on that, and there is the report. So this is the same report we saw before in the GUI session. Now we're seeing it externally from the JMeter IDE. We can actually create any of those JP@GC reports. And I also mentioned in the resources file that you can see more detail about the JMeter's plugins command line tool. And notice that there is an SH or bash file available for it for the Mac users and Linux users, and commands, and more detail about the parameters. And what I really want to show you here is the plugin types. So these are all of the names or report names that can be specified. And we specified the response times over time, but there are several other reports that can be selected or specified in that command, and it will produce that report for you. And it's a nice idea to, if we go back to the command prompt, it's a nice idea to call, instead of calling it test.ping, use that report name and .ping. And so if you have several of them that you want to create, you're not overlaying the same file. The final command line reporting dashboard. We talked about the command line or command prompt option for producing the dashboard report graphs. This is an alternative to using the IDE dashboard report option. The following command will also generate the report graphs. It starts with JMeter -G, JMeter JTL file, -O, and some output folder. Here we are at the command prompt again, and we're pointing to the bin directory of JMeter, and we have the command specified. I have specified a real file that's out there that we created in a session when we were running the test in the GUI. It's called perftest1.jtl, and we have a folder we're pointing to. In this case, it's an existing folder. So one thing we have to do before we try to execute the command is go to that folder and clear it out. So I'm selecting all and deleting. Done. We have an empty folder, output folder. Let's remove this, and now we're ready to execute the command. And we're done. Once again, the folder has been repopulated. We need to go in Windows Explorer and open that folder. When we do, we see that there's new information there. We click on the index.html file. It goes into the browser, and you see the same output we saw in the GUI session. My time has ended for this session. I thank you for yours. Join me in the next video.